Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a topic that really sparks a lot of conversation and some pretty strong opinions, too. The complexities around diversity and representation, especially in media and, well, professional fields generally.
Yeah, and our source material for this deep dive is an audio clip. It's titled No Whites or Men Allowed, Marvel Said So, .mp3, which, as you can guess, offers a very particular take on these discussions.
Right. So our mission here is to really unpack the arguments, the stats, the viewpoints presented in this source. We want to help you navigate the nuances of what diversity can mean to different people.
And to look at its real-world implications, yeah, all through the lens of this specific analysis we're looking at today.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
So the source kicks off by setting the scene around the 2019 release of Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I remember that, and it immediately highlights some of the, let's say, controversy surrounding it.
Exactly. It specifically points to a tweet, apparently telling white men who are haters not to see the film. The claim was they would pollute the cinema with their toxicity.
And the source. What
Wow.
did it make of that?
Well, it quickly pointed out what it saw as kind of an interesting contradiction, saying, telling people not to go see a film you're trying to promote isn't really the best way to promote it.
Makes sense.
And it also drew a parallel to the Black Panther release, noting there was apparently a similar vibe where some white people were reportedly told, maybe sit that one out.
Okay, but then it gets, as you said, more specific. The source really delves into comments made by Captain Marvel star Brie Larson.
That's right. According to the source material, Larson stated she was, quote, determined to make sure the Marvel movie's upcoming press junket is diverse and female,
Okay.
and pledging, again according to the source, that she'd keep the tour from becoming overwhelmingly white or male. It also claimed Larson wanted the film's critiquing to be led by minorities and women.
So how did the source react to those reported comments?
Well, it questioned if diversity is just never quite diverse enough for these people. That's the phrasing it used. And it criticized the whole idea of, quote, alienating entire groups of people.
Right, and it's important as we're going through this to keep reminding ourselves, and you, the listener, that we're relaying the specific arguments from the source material here for your consideration.
Exactly. We're presenting his perspective.
So to back this up, the source then brings in some data, right? Some numbers.
Yes, it cites findings from USC Annenberg's Inclusive Initiative. This is from 2017. They looked at the top critics who were reviewing the 100 highest grossing movies that year.
Okay, and what did that data show about who these critics were?
Well, the numbers were pretty striking, according to the source. It showed 67% of those top critics were white males.
67%.
Less than a quarter were white women. Less than 10% were what the source called unrepresented men, which presumably means men of color. And just 2.5%, a tiny fraction, were women of color among those top critics.
Wow, okay. That's a very clear breakdown from their data. So how did the source compare that to the sort of general population?
Yeah, that's the interesting part. It compared those critic figures to a U.S. population breakdown it provided. 30% white men, 30% white women, 20% men of color, and 20% women of color.
Right.
And the source called this gap a huge disconnect between who was reviewing the films and the population breakdown it presented.
So the argument being made in the source using these stats is that if a movie like Captain Marvel is meant as a, quote, love letter to women of color,
Right.
then given those critic demographics, there's an insanely low chance, as the source puts it, that a woman of color will actually get to see and review your movie through those main channels.
That's the connection it makes, yes. Linking the critics to the intended audience or theme.
Okay. But the source didn't stop at just race and gender, did it? It pushed the definition of diversity further.
It did. It raised a question, sort of a challenge, for diversity initiatives. If the goal is really to make a press tour as diverse as possible, shouldn't it also include, the gay population, the trans population, disabled people, and so on?
So broadening the scope.
Exactly. The source even called initiatives that only focus on women and minority groups based on race or sex bigoted. That's the term it used.
Strong language. And it went on to make a broader point about jobs, didn't it?
Yes. It asserted this principle that job professions will never, ever be an equal breakdown of the population, just fundamentally.
Okay.
And it linked the push for certain types of diversity, the ones focused on race and gender, to things like gender quotas and affirmative action, suggesting those are the sort of logical endpoint of that kind of thinking.
And the problem it saw, what was the core issue with these initiatives according to the source?
The source argued that they only recognize superficial diversity. like skin color or sex, things you see on the surface.
Instead of
Instead of, well, hiring based on what it called diversity of thought or diversity of IQ or merit or anything substantial.
merit being the key word there.
Absolutely. It stressed that preferring people based on characteristics they have absolutely no control over is, in its view, discriminatory. Full stop.
Hmm.
And it also argued that people, naturally tend towards certain jobs or education paths based on lots of different factors.
Right. Personal choice, interests.
Exactly. And that they don't need to be, like, herded for the sake of fair representation. You use the analogy pretty bluntly. They're not cattle.
Okay. So shifting focus a bit then. The source moved from the critics to the actual moviegoers, the audience itself.
It did. It brought in some stats from 2016 about who actually goes to the movies in the U.S.
And what did those show?
It noted that Caucasians made up 59% of moviegoers and bought 51% of the tickets that year.
Okay.
And gender-wise, the split between males and females buying tickets was, quote, almost 50-50, maybe with women going slightly more often.
Interesting. And age.
The biggest single age group for moviegoers in the U.S., according to the source's data, was 18 to 25-year-olds.
Right. So how did the source then tie these audience numbers back to the critics we were talking about earlier?
Well, the argument it made was, statistically speaking, if critics are actually going to be representative of viewers, then yeah, they would be mostly white, and at least half would be male, because those are the demographics, it claims, who predominantly go see the movies.
I see the logic it's presenting there.
And even looking specifically at Marvel films, the source concluded that the bulk of the people going to see Marvel films are probably men.
So all this data was used to reinforce its main point.
Yeah, that trying to force real-world representations in any industry or sector is, in its words, silly.
Okay. From there, the discussion broadened out again, didn't it, to affirmative action?
Yes. The source defined it first, the practice or policy of favoring individuals from groups known to have faced past discrimination. Positive discrimination was the term it used.
But then it offered a critique.
A strong one. Yeah. It contended that affirmative action has severed its connection to those historical roots.
And become.
And instead, it's blossomed into a system, the source claims, where people get or lose preferences or benefits based on a, quote, complex hierarchy of race, ethnicity, national origin, and sex.
A hierarchy.
Yes. And it explicitly stated that within this hierarchy, it perceives white people and men, quote, don't rate very highly. Again, this is a direct assertion from the source material we're relaying.
Understood. And to make this point more concrete, it brought in someone else's observations, Thomas Sowell.
That's right. It used observations from Thomas Sowell, apparently from the 1990s, looking at affirmative action in universities.
What was a specific example?
The source recounted Sowell's example of UC Berkeley. The 1987 freshman class was described as wonderfully diverse.
Okay, sounds good on the surface.
But Sowell apparently stated that more than 70% of black students failed to graduate from Berkeley at that time.
70%. Why?
Well, the reason given, according to Sowell via the source, was a mismatch. While the average black student admitted was above the national average on test scores,
Right.
the average white student at Berkeley was further above, and the average Asian student further above than the white students. So, relatively speaking, they were academically behind the curve at that specific institution.
Now, Sowell's conclusion, as presented by the source,
Was that these students were artificially turned into failures. That Berkeley had effectively, and this is a harsh phrase, rented these bodies for window dressing.
Oh.
And Sowell's advice, relayed by the source, was essentially for students to attend schools that actually matched their current educational capabilities, rather than being pushed into environments where they might struggle purely for diversity metrics.
That Berkeley example really highlights the source's concern about potential negative consequences of these policies, focusing on outcomes versus fit.
Exactly. It's a powerful illustration of the potential pitfalls the source sees when diversity initiatives prioritize numerical targets over individual preparedness or fit, potentially harming the very people they intend to help.
Okay, so following that line of argument, the source then uses hypotheticals to challenge this idea of fair representation, right? Applying quotas.
Yeah, it sort of plays out the logic. It asks about applying a 50-50 gender quota across different industries. It cited a 2016 survey showing the publishing industry was like 78% female.
Okay.
And then contrast that with U.S. Department of Labor data from the same year showing plumbing was 98% male. And also speech pathology, 98% female.
So the question becomes,
Should we then cap the female jobs in publishing? Or, Cut the number of female speech pathologists to make room for men to hit some kind of 50-50 target.
And the source's point is?
The people seem, in its view, pretty okay with applying this logic to male-dominated fields, but when you flip it to female-dominated fields, the argument doesn't really fly. There's an inconsistency it's pointing out.
It didn't stop there, did it? It pushed the analogy further.
No, it kept going. It asked about applying a real-world split to professional sports. Should we just bring in some more Latinos and Asians and more white people? Or even include some trans people based purely on population percentages? And another example, social services, where 16% of workers are black. Should, quote, 3% of those be tossed away and given to some other ethnic group to match a different demographic target?
So the conclusion the source draws from all these hypotheticals is quite pointed.
Very. It concludes that it seems like the only time people actually want to apply this real-world fair representation thing is when the jobs are coming from white people and men.
Right, so it's arguing there's a selective application of this principle.
That's precisely the argument it's building, that the focus shifts from equal opportunity to demanding equal outcomes, but primarily in certain sectors or when affecting certain groups.
Which leads directly into its summary of the core argument, right? The shift from opportunity to outcome.
Exactly. It framed the whole debate as having moved away from talking about equal opportunity and now legitimately talking about equal outcome.
And it reiterated its view on why that's problematic.
Yes, it restated the belief that there are just so many variables that go into job choice and education, so many factors,
Right.
that it's almost entirely ridiculous, in the source's words, to suggest that it's as simple as just saying we need more different groups of people in these different fields and therefore problem solved. It sees it as far more complex.
But it did offer a condition where fair representation could be okay.
It did. The source argued that wanting fair representation is actually perfectly fine provided, and this is the key part, provided there are people who have the merit to get into these particular roles and they actually want to be in them.
Merit and desire.
Merit and desire, yes. Not just category.
So ultimately, the source's final takeaway, the conclusion it presents.
It boils down to this. Selecting people based on superficial characteristics, as it defines them, ultimately hurts the people who deserve to be there based on merit.
Right.
And conversely, that excluding people who can actually do a job well based on merit simply because they're white and male is, well, in its view, discriminatory.
Okay. We've definitely unpacked a truly thought-provoking source today. Lots of statistics, some very direct arguments, and critiques of current approaches to diversity and representation.
Absolutely. What we've explored here is a specific perspective, one that really challenges some commonly held beliefs about how industries, how professions should ideally reflect society.
Yeah, it pushes us, and hopefully you, to think about the line between striving for equal opportunity and potentially, as the source argues, moving towards demanding equal outcomes.
Exactly. Is there a difference, and where does that line sit? That's the question the source implicitly raises.
So what does this all mean for you listening? This deep dive, based on this source, asked us to really consider, should people be chosen for roles based on those characteristics the source called superficial? Or is affirmative action, as presented here, actually a flawed concept? What stands out to you from everything we've discussed?